Imagine just for a second that you're holding a book,
Okay, holding a book.
right? You feel the weight of it in your palms. You feel the texture of the binding. You open the cover to turn that first page.
Yeah.
And as you do, the paper literally cuts your hands.
Oh, wow.
And I am not talking about like a mild, annoying little paper cut that you just brush off.
Right, not the kind you get from a printer.
Exactly. I mean, a deliberate, jagged slice right across your skin. You drop the book, you're shocked, and you're bleeding.
Yeah.
The text was actually designed like physically engineered to startle you.
To draw blood.
Yeah, to draw blood.
Yeah.
It was meant to wake you up.
That is an incredibly jarring image. I mean, we live in a world where we expect literature to comfort us, or to entertain us.
Or maybe gently educate us at best.
Right, exactly. We rarely expect a book to just completely dismantle our comfort zone, but that visceral shock perfectly captures the reality of the text we're opening up today.
Because today we are taking a deep dive into an absolutely groundbreaking piece of writing. We're talking about Bama's 1992 autobiography, Karukku.
A massively important book.
Huge. And for you listening, especially if you're a student of sociology or literature or history, you've probably encountered a lot of texts about systemic inequality.
Sure, it's a common topic.
But calling Karukku just another, life story or a book about inequality is a massive understatement.
It really is. I mean, this is the very first autobiography written by a Dalit woman in the Tamil language.
The very first.
Yeah. And it acts as the absolute blueprint for understanding how systemic oppression functions, not just on some high-level societal scale, but on a deeply psychological and physical level.
So to truly grasp the magnitude of what Bama accomplished here, we're going to practically synthesize a profound stack of critical sources today.
We really are. We're pulling heavily from the translated text itself, obviously.
Right, which was guided by that brilliant introduction from the translator, Lakshmi Holmstrom.
Exactly. And we're also weaving in the analytical essays of scholars like M.S.S. Pandian. He does this amazing job breaking down the politics of Bama's narrative choices.
And we're going to apply Kimberly Crenshaw's foundational frameworks on intersectionality, too.
Because we have to map out exactly how different vectors of oppression collide in her life. We're looking at the crushing, literal, physical weight of the caste system.
The deep structural hypocrisy she exposes within religious institutions.
Right, and ultimately, the radical, liberating power of language itself.
So let's ground this immediately. Let's talk about what makes Karukku such a literary and cultural earthquake.
Well, for generations, the Dalit community, these are the marginalized communities in India, historically relegated to the very bottom of the Hindu caste hierarchy.
The people who were previously labeled with that deeply degrading term, untouchable.
Right, exactly. For generations, their history has been written by outsiders, anthropologists, colonial administrators, upper caste reformers.
So their stories were recorded at all, they were completely filtered.
Filtered through the lens of someone looking down from above, always an outsider's perspective.
Which is precisely why Karukku operates so differently, right? It functions as a testimonial.
Yes, a testimonial. And that term, it actually originates in Latin American literature, but it perfectly applies here.
Can you break down for the students listening what a testimonial actually is?
Yeah, so a testimonial is a narrative that speaks for a collective community rather than just an individual ego. It's not just my story, it's our story.
Mini Krishnan, the series editor in the material we're analyzing, points this out beautifully.
She really does. She notes that Bama's book breaks a silence that lasted for more generations than we can count.
It is a voice from the inside, demanding to be heard on its own terms. It totally refuses the gaze of the anthropologist.
And the title itself is basically the first strike in that demand. Karukku.
Let's talk about that title. In the text, Bama actually explains the literal origin of the word.
Right. It refers to the palmyra leaves scattered around her village.
But these leaves aren't like smooth, normal leaves.
No, they have these serrated, saw-edged borders. They're sharp.
And as a little girl, she would be sent out to gather firewood. Right.
Yeah, and she would play with these scattered leaves, and they would literally scratch and tear at her skin. The very environment she lived in was sharp.
That physical reality is just, it's the foundational metaphor for her entire existence.
The Karukku is the trauma. It represents the events that, as she writes, occurred during many stages of her life, cutting her and making her bleed.
But the brilliance of the title goes beyond just the imagery of a cut, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There is this felicitous, incredibly layered pun at work in the Tamil language here.
I love this part.
Right. The word Karukku contains the root word karu.
And karu means embryo. recede.
Exactly. It signifies freshness, newness, creation.
So think about the duality encapsulated in that single word.
Yes. The trauma cuts you. The systemic oppression shatters you.
But out of that bleeding fragment, a new identity is born.
Precisely. The trauma acts as the seed of a revolutionary Dalit consciousness. The wound is literally the birthplace of the resistance.
That linguistic puzzle, it really sets the stage for a heavy theological subversion she pulls right in the foreword of the book,
Yeah, she quotes Hebrews 4.12 from the New Testament.
which describes the Word of God as being alive and active, sharper than any two-edged sword.
Piercing even to dividing soul and spirit.
Right. And usually, the institutional church uses that imagery to describe the power of Scripture to judge the hearts of men.
Like a top-down divine authority. God judging you.
But Bama completely flips the script on that interpretation, doesn't she?
She totally flips it. She looks at the deeply entrenched casteism surrounding her, even within the church itself, and concludes that the institutional word of God is stagnant.
It's just not working anymore.
No, it is no longer stirring the hardened hearts of the oppressors. It has been completely pacified.
So she reclaims the metaphor.
She does. She suggests that the Dalits themselves must become that two-edged sword.
They must become the active, living word.
Exactly. Their lived experience, their pain, and their voices must be the blade that pierces the heart of injustice.
And you can really see that blade at work in how she physically constructs the book itself.
The structure is fascinating.
Right, because traditional autobiographies are universally linear. I was born to these parents in this town in this year.
Then I went to school, then I got a job.
Yeah, it's a chronological march of the individual ego. But our sources, particularly MSS Pandian's analysis, highlight that Karukku shatters that timeline entirely.
She organizes her life thematically instead.
Which is so interesting.
It is. You get chapters dedicated to work, to education, to belief.
This structural choice completely decenters her as an isolated protagonist.
Right. But the most striking, arguably the most aggressive choice she makes is the systematic erasure of specific names.
This blew my mind. The upper caste individuals who attack her community, the police who raid the village, the headmaster who humiliates her.
The village priest, the schools, the convents.
Every single one of them goes completely unnamed.
Which, at first glance, you might think, oh, she's protecting them.
Right. Why grant anonymity to the architects of your pain?
But it actually achieves the exact opposite of protection. Naming them would isolate the incidents.
It would let the reader off the hook.
Exactly. It would allow a reader to say, oh, well, that specific headmaster in that specific town was just a bad apple. What a shame.
But by throwing a shroud of anonymity over them, she refuses to let the reader dismiss the trauma as some local anomaly.
Right. An anonymous headmaster represents every castiest headmaster in the country.
An anonymous police force represents the state's inherently violent relationship with all Dalits.
It shifts the narrative completely from, I experienced this singular injustice, to, we experience this systemic reality.
It's a profound indictment of the entire structure.
And it creates this really brilliant contrast with how she treats the people within her own community.
Oh yeah, the text is incredibly warm when discussing the Sherry.
The Dalit settlement.
Right. She names people like Kamen.
The so-called village idiot who makes the most amazing gruel.
Or Ponthan, the village thief who supposedly had the agility to dodge demons.
She grants them full, vibrant individuality. She gives them names, quirks, humanity.
While the upper caste oppressors are just reduced to these faceless, monolithic functions of a corrupt system.
It is a deliberate redistribution of humanity. You know, the literary establishment usually grants all the complexity to the elite and treats the marginalized as a faceless monolith.
But Bama inverts that entirely.
Completely turns it upside down.
But, before Bama could grow up and wield her narrative like a weapon, she first had to understand the invisible borders that were suffocating her.
The physical reality of her childhood.
Right. It's one thing to realize your identity is being weaponized in the abstract. But Bama didn't learn this through theology or critical theory.
No, she learned it through the literal dirt under her feet.
And the physical space she was permitted to occupy. The geography of her village was basically a physical map of oppression.
Because caste is not just an abstract social hierarchy, it dictates physical space and biological assumptions down to the inch.
We see this so vividly in her defining childhood realization, what the scholars often refer to as the snack packet incident.
This is such a crucial moment in the book.
So she's in the 3rd class, just a young girl walking home from school, normal day.
Right.
And she sees an elder from her own community carrying a small packet of adays, which is a type of fried snack.
But the way he is carrying it is utterly bizarre to her.
Yeah, he isn't holding the packet in his hand,
He is holding it by a string, carrying it out far away from his body.
bowing low, and cupping the hand that holds the string with his other hand, almost walking in a crouch.
And as a child, she finds this hilarious.
She thinks he's playing a game.
Trying to balance the package or keep it from falling. The innocence of her perspective is just heartbreaking.
Because she goes home and tells her older brother, Annan, about this funny thing she saw.
And Annan shatters her worldview. He has to explain the logic of pollution to her.
For the students listening, what exactly is the logic of pollution?
So he tells her that the elder wasn't playing a game. He had to hold the package by a string because his Dalit hand is considered inherently polluted.
Inherently polluted
Yeah.
by birth.
Right. If he touched the wrapping paper directly, that pollution would transfer through the paper into the food and contaminate the upper caste Niker landlord who was going to eat it.
So the string acts as a ritual bridge.
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of that ritual bridge.
It's so calculated.
It allows for the transfer of goods, the extraction of labor and resources,
Right.
without the transfer of the imagined biological hazard.
It is a system designed to utilize the Dalit body while simultaneously treating it as a vector of spiritual and physical disease.
Hearing that just makes your stomach drop, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, consider the sci-fi dystopias we consume in pop culture, where an underclass is treated as walking biological hazards, requiring quarantine protocols just to interact with the elite.
Right, but Bama didn't live in a sci-fi novel.
This was her Tuesday. Her actual neighbor had to use a quarantine protocol just to hand over a snack.
And that logic of pollution is mapped onto the very earth they live on. The village topography in Karukku is strictly segregated.
The upper caste streets are central, paved, clean.
While the Dalit settlement, the Sheri, is pushed to the absolute periphery of the village.
And the sources point out exactly what it borders. It is located next to the cemetery, and the area is used as open latrines.
The shitfields.
That kind of zoning is never an accident.
Never. By physically locating the Dalit community next to areas associated with human waste and death, the upper castes ensure that the Dalit body is constantly, subliminally associated with filth and the social imagination.
It's spatial segregation designed to enforce a psychological hierarchy.
And the hypocrisy is that Dalits are forced to enter the upper caste streets to perform grueling manual labor.
But the upper castes never set foot in the Sheri.
Exactly. The physical boundaries enforce the mental boundaries, and it gets even more granular and intimate than the layout of the streets.
We have to discuss the 4-foot rule.
Yes, the 4-foot rule. This is one of the most visceral manifestations of this distance-based pollution logic.
Bama describes Dalit laborers, including her own grandmother, working from dawn to dusk for the Niker families.
Backbreaking agricultural work.
Right. And when these laborers were exhausted and needed a drink of water, they weren't handed a cup or a tumbler.
No, the upper caste women would bring out vessels of water and pour it from a height of 4 feet into the cupped hands of the Dalit laborers.
4 feet away.
They poured from that height to ensure there was absolutely no possibility of physical contact.
Not even the chance of a rogue droplet splashing back onto the vessel.
Because that would ostensibly pollute the entire upper caste household.
The psychological dissonance of this is just staggering. Think about it. These same Dalit women, the ones deemed too biologically hazardous to hold a water cup, were required to perform the most intimate domestic tasks inside those very same Nayark homes.
Oh, absolutely. They swept the floors, they cleaned the courtyards, they managed the waste.
The upper castes relied entirely on Dalit labor to maintain their physical cleanliness and standard of living.
Yet they viewed the laborers themselves as a toxic contagion. It is the ultimate hypocrisy of the caste system.
They extract the labor to maintain purity, but condemn the laborer as impure.
And this dehumanization, it extends to the very sustenance they were given.
Right, let's look at the dehumanization through food. When the Dalit laborers were paid for their backbreaking work, they were rarely given fair monetary wages.
They were paid in kind, often with spoiled, stinking, broken grain gruel.
Bama writes about watching her grandmother eat this spoiled, fermented food.
But what terrified young Bama wasn't just the quality of the food.
It was the way her grandmother ate it, wasn't it?
She ate it submissively, gratefully, as if it were ambrosia.
Wow.
That is the moment the external oppression becomes internal trauma.
Seeing her elders internalize their own inferiority.
Believing on a fundamental level that they deserved this treatment. that the broken gruel was their rightful lot in life simply because of the caste they were born into.
That created a desperate, almost suffocating panic within Bama.
She realized that if she didn't actively resist, the system wouldn't just take her labor.
It would consume her mind.
She would end up just like her grandmother, forced to be thankful for the literal spoiled scraps of her oppressors.
So put yourself in her shoes. You are a brilliant, observant young girl. You see the world is rigged against you. Your physical space is violently restricted. Your very touch is considered poison.
What do you do? Where do you run?
Exactly. Pema's family sought a way out of this Hindu caste hierarchy by converting to Catholicism.
They, like many others, hoped to find a sanctuary, a community built on the radical equality preached by Christ.
But this brings us to the most controversial and arguably the most painful revelation in the book.
What happens when the sanctuary is built on the exact same toxic foundation you were trying to escape?
This is where Bama's critique becomes incredibly piercing.
She exposes the profound disillusionment of discovering that the Catholic Church in India did not abolish caste, it merely baptized it.
The institution adopted the vocabulary of salvation while maintaining the architecture of oppression.
And the text highlights this beautifully through the coconut incident.
Let's walk through that because it's such a clear example. Bama is in the 7th class at a Catholic school.
She is just playing outside.
A green coconut falls from a tree nearby. She didn't touch it. She didn't try to steal it.
But the headmaster, who belongs to an upper caste, summons the entire school for morning assembly.
He pulls Bama up in front of everyone and publicly shames her.
He doesn't just accuse her of a prank. He explicitly links the imagined crime to her caste.
Right. He declares, "You have shown us your true nature as a pariah."
We cannot allow you inside this school. Stand outside.
True nature. It's the assumption of inherent criminality based entirely on bloodline.
But the true betrayal happens next.
Yeah. Bama appeals to the local priest. She goes to him expecting Christian justice.
Her logic is so sound here. The headmaster is just a prejudiced man, but the priest represents God.
He is supposed to be the arbiter of truth and mercy.
And the priest looks at this young, marginalized girl and says, "After all, you are from the Sherry. You might have done it. You must have done it."
You must have done it. The leap from possibility to absolute certainty based on nothing but her zip code and her caste.
The school is revealed not as a neutral place of learning, but as a courtroom that assumes the inherent guilt of the Dalit body.
When the priest sides with the oppressor, it signals to Bama that there is no moral safe space.
If the representative of the divine believes in your inherent sinfulness, not the theological sin we all share, but a specific, localized, biological sinfulness, you are left in a state of absolute spiritual exile.
The church is complicit in the violence of the state and the village.
But here's where we have to pause and really dig into the complexity of Bama's life, because she doesn't just walk away from her faith.
No, as an adult, despite the trauma of the coconut incident, she makes a massive, life-altering decision.
She becomes a nun.
She takes formal vows and enters a religious order. Now, let's play devil's advocate here for a moment.
Okay, let's do it.
Historically, the Catholic Church in India was one of the few avenues for marginalized groups to get any education or social mobility at all when state schools completely failed them or barred their entry.
That is historically true.
So she enters the convent to teach and help her people. But she ends up calling the convent a luxurious cage. Isn't that ignoring the very real access she was granted?
It's a crucial tension to explore. Yes, the church provided access, but Bama forces us to examine the conditions of that access.
Access without equality is just another form of subjugation.
Exactly. She enters the convent with this stubborn, radical hope that she can change the system from the inside.
That she will find a sisterhood of equals dedicated to the poor.
Instead, she discovers that the sacred vows themselves, poverty, chastity, and obedience, are weaponized as tools to enforce the caste hierarchy.
Let's break those mechanics down for the listener. How exactly do you weaponize a vow of poverty?
Bama observes that the poverty in the convent is a complete sham.
A sham.
The institution is incredibly wealthy. They build massive structures. The upper caste nuns live in comfort. They have abundant food and resources.
Yet, the Dalit nuns and students are constantly reminded to remain poor in spirit and are denied basic necessities.
The vow of poverty is used to justify the material deprivation of the Dalits while the institution hoards wealth.
That is infuriating. And what about the vow of obedience?
Obedience is arguably the most insidious.
How so?
Bama discovers that the division of labor within the convent perfectly mirrors the caste system outside of it.
So the Dalit nuns and students are relegated to menial chores.
Sweeping the massive premises, swabbing classrooms, and crucially, cleaning out the lavatories.
Meanwhile, the upper caste nuns occupy positions of authority.
Teaching the prestigious classes and spending their time in, quote, spiritual contemplation.
The vow of obedience forces the Dalit women to do the dirty work without complaining.
If they protest, they aren't just breaking a workplace rule. They are committing a sin against God.
Our sources mention that she even overhears upper caste nuns using incredibly dehumanizing language.
Saying things like, to aid us is like aiding cobras.
They view Dalits as subhuman predators inside a convent, the supposed sanctuary of God's love.
Exactly. Bama comes to a theological conclusion. The church in India is worshiping what she calls a wealthy Jesus.
A wealthy Jesus.
This is a sanitized, elite version of Christ that validates the status quo, protects property, and prioritizes prestigious upper caste students.
This wealthy Jesus completely ignores the poor Jesus of the Gospels.
The marginalized working-class laborer who associated with outcasts touched the untouchables and fought for systemic justice.
The institution preached equality from the pulpit, but in practice they maintained separate seating areas in the pews.
And shockingly, even separate cemeteries for Dalits.
Separate cemeteries, because even in death, when you are nothing but bones returning to dust, the upper caste believed your proximity could pollute them.
This realization that the state through the schools and the church are fundamentally rigged against her leads us to an incredibly vital academic framework for understanding her unique pain.
Yes, to understand the mechanics of Bama's reality, we have to look at Kimberly Crenshaw's foundational concept of intersectionality.
Intersectionality is not just a buzzword. It's an analytical tool that explains how various social identities, like race, class, and gender, do not operate independently.
They intersect and interact to create unique compounded modes of discrimination.
Right. It's not simply an additive problem. Being a Dalit woman isn't just about facing casteism on Monday, classism on Tuesday, and sexism on Wednesday.
It's about how all three of those vectors crash together at the exact same moment to create a state of total exclusion.
You cannot separate the woman from the Dalit or the Dalit from the laborer.
The sources lay out Bama's triple burden very clearly, and I want to walk through the mechanics of each layer for our student listeners.
The first layer is caste, which enforces ritual purity.
This is the foundation we've discussed. The 4-foot rule, the spatial segregation of the Sheri, the inherent assumption that her body is a biological and spiritual hazard.
It is the denial of her basic humanity.
And that ritual purity is inextricably linked to the second layer Crenshaw's framework illuminates for us, the economic trap, or class.
Because once you designate an entire group of people as socially and physically polluted, you've effectively created a captive, easily exploitable labor force.
Bama details the penile system, the system of bonded labor.
The mechanics of the penile system are brutal. Dalits were landless. An agricultural laborer might need a small advance for a wedding, a funeral, or just to survive a famine.
The upper caste landlord provides the loan, but the interest rates are mathematically impossible to pay off.
The laborer is then bonded to the landlord's fields. That debt is passed down generationally.
Dalits are working like machines from dawn to dusk, but they never build wealth.
Furthermore, the economic exploitation is deeply gendered.
Bama notes that women are paid significantly less than men for the exact same grueling field work.
And they are constantly swindled at the weighing scales or paid in the spoiled grain we mentioned earlier.
So you are ritually despised, and you are economically trapped in a multi-generational debt cycle. That brings us to the third layer, gender.
Specifically, how Dalit women are subjected to both state and patriarchal violence.
And our sources give a chilling, extended example of this intersectional violence in what is known as the cemetery conflict.
The cemetery conflict is a microcosm of the triple burden.
There was a massive, violent clash in Bama's village between the Dalit community and the upper caste Salyars over a piece of land.
The police representing the power of the state were called in, and they immediately raided the Dalit settlement.
But the way the police enacted violence was highly specific and highly gendered.
While the Dalit men faced physical battery, arrest, and imprisonment, the police specifically targeted the Dalit women with sexualized violence and extreme verbal degradation.
They used horrific gendered slurs designed to break the women psychologically.
The patriarchal state utilizes sexual shame as a weapon of caste control.
They know that by humiliating the women, by attacking their dignity and threatening their bodily autonomy, they strike at the honor and the resilience of the entire community.
It is a calculated tactic to terrorize the marginalized into submission.
And where was the church during this?
Yeah.
When the village police are brutalizing these women, did the convent or the priests offer sanctuary?
This is where the intersectional squeeze becomes an absolute vice.
Yeah.
When the Dalit women desperately sought help from the priests and nuns regarding the police brutality, they were literally turned away.
The church authorities viewed the protesting Dalits as troublemakers who were disturbing the peace in the village.
Think about the geometry of that trap.
On one side, you have the ritualized disgust of the caste system in the village, defining your body as filth.
On the other side, you have the economic and sexual aggression of the police and the state, treating you as property to be destroyed.
And from above, looking down at you, you have the moral judgment and outright abandonment of the church.
It is a totalizing trap. She is squeezed by the village topography, the agricultural economy, the state police apparatus, and the religious convent.
Every institution designed to structure society is structured against her.
So how do you fight an enemy that attacks you from the fields, from the police station, from the altar?
You can't play by their rules because the rules are the weapon. You have to rewrite the rules entirely.
And that brings us to the story of Bama's liberation, her method of slashing back against the system.
The catalyst for this transformation actually comes from her older brother, Anan.
Anan is a pivotal figure. He had gone away to university, stepped outside the immediate suffocating bubble of the village, and observed how the broader world worked.
He comes back and delivers a fundamental, brutal truth to young Bama.
He says, because we are born into the pariah jati, we are never given any honor or dignity or respect, but if you study and make progress, you can throw off these indignities.
He essentially tells her that for a Dalit woman, respect isn't a given human right. It is something you have to forcefully seize through intellectual superiority.
Education becomes her primary tool. It isn't just about getting a job. Education is a weapon of self-defense.
And Bama internalizes this completely. She writes that she studied in a frenzy almost.
She poured all her breath and being into proving that Dalits could study, comprehend, and articulate complex thoughts just as well as anyone else.
This intellectual resistance allows her to gain financial independence by becoming a teacher, proving her competence in a space historically denied to her.
But securing a teaching degree isn't the end of her resistance.
To truly liberate herself, she has to perform two massive, radical acts. First, she realizes she has to physically and spiritually leave the convent.
She recognizes that her life as a nun, despite her noble intentions to help her community, is a counterfeit existence.
She is hiding her true self, stifling her anger, and playing the role of the submissive, grateful subordinate to survive in this upper caste elite environment.
She describes the feeling of leaving the convent with such vulnerability.
She says stepping out into the world alone felt like being a bird with broken wings or a mongrel dog completely unprotected, stripped of the institutional shield.
But she chooses the terrifying distress of the outside world over the fraudulent, patronizing smile of the convent.
She reclaims her identity as an independent, unfiltered Dalit woman.
Which sets the stage for her ultimate and arguably most famous act of resistance, the actual writing of Karukku.
To understand the magnitude of what she did, we have to look deeply into the politics of language in India.
Let me give you an analogy to frame this.
Go for it.
Imagine a brilliant author writing a deeply philosophical, complex, best-selling autobiography, but they write the entire thing, not just the dialogue snippets, but the main narration, the deep philosophical arguments, the theological critiques, entirely in a heavily stigmatized street slang.
They completely ignore the standard grammatical rules of the elite.
And by the sheer force of their intellect, they force literary critics at Oxford and Harvard to read, study, and respect a dialect those critics have spent their entire lives mocking.
That analogy perfectly captures Bama's linguistic audacity.
The literary establishment in Tamil Nadu favored a dialect known as Sentamil.
This is a highly refined, pure, formalized version of Tamil. It is heavily Sanskritized, bound by rigid, ancient grammatical rules, and inextricably associated with the upper caste.
Sentamil acted as a gatekeeper. If you didn't write in it, you weren't considered a real writer, you were just uneducated.
But Bama refuses to play the gatekeeper's game. She writes Karukku entirely in Chari Tamil.
This is the demotic, colloquial, spoken dialect of the Dalit settlement. The language of the streets, the language of the fields.
She uses the slang of her neighbors. She incorporates oral work chants used by laborers.
She uses the specific localized names for Dalit foods and agricultural practices.
As Lakshmi Holmstrom points out in the translation notes, Bama completely overturns the aesthetics of received upper caste Tamil. She breaks the formal rules of grammar on purpose.
She is committing an act of intellectual rebellion.
She refuses to sanitize her identity or her language to make it palatable for a mainstream upper caste audience.
She essentially says, my reality is valid, and my language is a perfectly capable, incredibly complex vehicle for art, theology, and philosophy. If you want to understand my life, you have to learn my language.
She forces the academic establishment to enter her world on her terms.
And in doing so, she brings the metaphor of the title beautifully, sharply full circle.
She takes the Karukku, the serrated palmyra leaf that scarred her hands as a child, the traumas that cut her, the language that was deemed coarse and rough, and she turns it into a weapon.
She wields her native language like the two-edged sword she read about in Hebrews.
She uses it to slash through the silence of the literary and social establishment. She cuts through the boundaries of caste, gender, and religious hypocrisy.
It is an awe-inspiring intellectual journey.
We have followed Bama from that devastating childhood realization of the vadai on a string, where she learned her very physical touch was considered toxic pollution.
We navigated the profound betrayal of the wealthy Jesus in the convent, exploring how the seemingly holy vows of poverty and obedience were twisted into chains of servitude.
We broke down the crushing mechanics of the triple burden, seeing exactly how caste, class, and gender squeezed Dalit women from every conceivable angle.
And finally, we witnessed her triumph as an independent thinker who weaponized her own language, turning the blade of her oppression back against the system that tried to erase her.
And it is absolutely crucial to remember why this text matters to you right now, wherever you're listening. Karukku is not a dusty historical document about a specific village in 1992.
It is an active, demanding lens. It challenges us to look at the architecture of the institutions around us today.
Exactly, because the mechanisms of exclusion rarely announce themselves as oppression.
How do our modern schools, our corporate workplaces, our places of worship implicitly enforce exclusion?
How often is structural discrimination disguised as tradition or maintaining order or even piety?
Bama forces us to look past the stated mission of an institution and examine who is actually scrubbing the floors.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to carry with you.
Bama ultimately had to abandon the religious institution she loved, an institution that ostensibly existed to serve the poor, in order to truly find her faith and her community.
She had to step out into the terrifying, unprotected, unknown to reclaim her integrity.
So ask yourself, in your own life, how often do the structures and institutions that are designed to help or educate or employ you actually force you to wear a disguise?
How much of your true identity are you sanitizing to remain palatable to the gatekeepers?
And what would it cost you to finally drop that disguise, embrace the sharp, serrated edges of your own experience, and speak in your own unfiltered voice?